So, welcome everyone. My name's Damien, and I'm leading this month's Monday nights. And, each of the Monday night teachers picks a topic that they want to present. And so it's not structured, it's really up to each teacher. And so this month I was particularly prompted by a teaching by Geshe Doga, the Tibetan Lama that lives here, several weeks ago, where he said that, understanding the Dharma, like really to understand the Dharma, and I'll talk about what that means in a little while, but to really understand the Dharma is quite difficult. And in reality, and he was directing this comment to the study group, and he said, in reality, almost all of your daily activities are not Dharma. Not Dharma. And it sort of struck me because I would think, most of the regular participants here in the centre who, for many years practicing, they would hope that the bulk or some of their daily activity would be Dharma. So like Dharma, like the refuge prayer that I said, the idea is sort of like taking refuge or putting your trust. So when I say that prayer, I'm trying to put my trust into the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings, which we can call Dharma, and then the community of highly realized practitioners. Let's say, for example, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So that's Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. These are Sanskrit. All three are Sanskrit words. Even the word Buddha is a Sanskrit word, as is Dharma and Sangha. So Sangha is this collection of highly realized people who are helping us to practice. And then the Dharma. So the external Dharma is like all these teachings of the Buddha, which are here in the altar. So on this, on this side is the full collection of all of the Buddha's teachings that were taken to Tibet. So it's not all of the Buddha's teachings, because the Buddha taught for at least 50 years. So there are others, but this is the full collections of the teachings that made it to Tibet, and it's a lot of teachings. And then on this side are all the teachings of the great Indian saints. So in the period before Buddhism went to Tibet, there was very large monasteries, really extensive communities of practitioners in India. Really thriving, and so Nagarjuna, Shantideva, Chandrakirti, Dignaga, all these famous Indian scholars and practitioners, yogis. So this is the collection of all of their teachings. So that is an external. That is an external Dharma. The books. And like my bookshelf, I've got hundreds of books probably. It's an external Dharma. And when I'm on my deathbed, the fact that I've got hundreds of books in my bookcase is totally irrelevant, at the moment of my death. So the only thing that matters then is whatever I've managed to incorporate into my own thinking and my own understanding and practice. So that internal Dharma is actually the Dharma that really can benefit me. So when Geshe Doga was saying this, that the reality is that and sort of on just even an initial introspection, I totally agree. That very few of my daily activities are actually pure Dharma activities. And so the thing then that I thought is to talk a little bit about what is the Dharma, to understand that. And also, it sort of triggered for me this idea of complacency, that my enemy, the enemy in my mind is, and initially I was thinking about it just in terms of Dharma practice, but then I quickly realised that it actually applies almost to every aspect of my life and probably every aspect of most people's lives, that complacency and the terms that I thought about it was about not raising the bar on your approach to life. So particularly I sort of framed this in the idea of Dharma practice, but it also applies in terms of the quality of our relationships, maybe our work performance, our sporting performance, our hygiene, cleanliness, cooking ability, whatever we have an interest in life, that the complacency prevents us maybe getting better. And I particularly for myself, I framed it in terms of Dharma, understanding Dharma, trying to apply Dharma, trying to be mindful and trying to be kind, trying to be compassionate, that not saying that I had completely dropped the ball on all of that, but I did feel that after more than 40 years studying and listening to teachings, that maybe the energy of focus, the focused energy of learning something new, trying to understand it and all this, that maybe some of that had faded, or this idea of complacent. I had maybe become complacent. So I thought, and then I started to think about it, and I thought, actually, complacency is a problem for probably all of us in different aspects of our life. And so then trying to cultivate this idea of lifting my energy to be more focused or more dedicated or more clear, clarity. So then, the question then was about what is Dharma, like if Geshe-Doga says, 99% of the, I don't know if he used that term, but he said nearly all of your daily activities is not Dharma. So then to try to be clear about what is Buddhist Dharma, so if we, the Dalai Lama has said that the philosophical view of Buddhism is dependent arising. So this idea of interrelatedness of things, and that, this dependent arising. So instead of it being a creator God, so if we're talking about philosophical view, instead of Buddhism saying there's a creator God, Buddhism says that everything arises through this dependent arising. And so that's like an alternative to a creator God philosophy. And the practice of Buddhism is loving kindness, warm-heartedness. So, but loving kindness, love and compassion is not, it's not just the precinct of Buddhism. It's, all of religion's humanistic approach to life, maybe even our natural dispositions, even independent of any philosophical structure, maybe even as humans, our natural disposition is towards love and compassion. And I think, as I mentioned last week, the reality of being born human is that altruism is absolutely necessary for the survival of any newly born human. You know, it's only through the altruism of others that a newborn baby can survive. So, to some degree, then, I think it's reasonable to say that love and compassion are native to the human experience. You know, and so, you know, and many, many people will talk about the innate goodness of all human beings. And I think that's sort of making a reference to the fact that love and compassion sits naturally with the human life. So then, obviously then, love and compassion itself is not the mark, is not the singular mark of Buddhist Dharma, because it's common to all religious faiths, and it's common even to a person without any faith. You know, it's not restricted to religions, and it's not restricted to Buddhism. So then, what then is it that starts to distinguish Buddhist Dharma? And so the answer to this is, let's say it's primarily not being focused on this life, but trying to, at the very least, prepare yourself for a future life. And so it's more to do with the motivation than the actual engagement. So love and compassion, let's say, is just love and compassion. But love and compassion done with the motivation of trying to benefit yourself, and particularly trying to benefit others beyond just the mere confines of this immediate existence. That's probably starting to be a mark of Buddhist Dharma. So something not just restricted to the immediate day-to-day or this immediate situation, but motivating yourself to let's say, benefit yourself and to also to benefit others, not just within the constraints of this life, but trying to motivate and then dedicate your activity to benefit others in a much a longer term or a more extensive outlook than just this immediate existence. So if that becomes, if that's the mark of Dharma, then I think it is quite, certainly in my own case, a very rare thing for me to actually consciously direct my mind to a motivation of benefiting others beyond this mere momentary circumstance. So I might be kind and compassionate to somebody, or I might be patient with somebody. I might be generous, generous to the person sitting outside the supermarket there who's asking for money. But when I do that, if I do that, it's just an immediate generosity. I'm not consciously able to try to expand my motivation to make it something beyond the immediate consideration. So particularly here then complacency, I think, for me, the way that I was thinking about this topic was, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who was one of the founders of this centre. He passed away 3 years ago. It was actually the anniversary of his passing away just on the weekend. He he very much focused on this idea of trying to do every single attitude, every single action with a bodhicitta attitude. And bodhicitta means bodhi is Buddha, citta is mind. So it's trying to adopt a mind for enlightenment in even your ordinary actions. And so he would say, like giving money to the beggar, it's not just the immediate giving money to the beggar. It's, by virtue of me giving this, may I, in the future lives, give you the Dharma, give you guidance, give you assistance to practice the Dharma, and eventually lead you to full liberation or full enlightenment. So trying to couple in a much grander motivation in even the simplest activity. And say, even opening the door for somebody, or serving a cup of tea, or cleaning a toilet, or going to work, or whatever it is, to try to have an expansive motivation that is beyond the immediacy of the action. And so when I started thinking about complacency, I was starting to think, I have become complacent in that giving some money to the beggar, that's great. But it's just that really sort of narrow, it's not saying that it's not kind, that it's not generous, that it's not compassionate, that it's not of benefit to the person, but to try to see that in that limitation of my motivation, or the limitation of my thinking, that is a form of complacency. Because in a way I'm wasting my life going around being kind, or being compassionate, or being generous, or being patient, but I'm not really taking advantage even of those simple actions that I'm doing. And I'm calling that complacency. I know you'll have questions. That's fine. And then I was thinking, I thought, so I think it's a reasonable thing to put, in a way, to put pressure on yourself. So I'm trying to put some pressure on myself to raise the bar of my own thinking, my own motivation, trying to lift that by identifying it as complacency. So if I'm reading the newspapers and I'm seeing all this turmoil that somebody has created in the world, then my mind of patience, or my knowledge, my wisdom, or my compassion for all parties involved, to really try to lift that above the initial reaction that I might have, above my sort of worldly reaction. So we have a really, I got plenty of guts here, so I got plenty of gut reaction to what comes, what I see in the world. So, sort of with thinking, okay, my gut reaction is reasonable, but to then try to transform that into, thinking in terms of compassion, compassion even for people's ignorance, compassion for their anger, compassion for their prejudice, or compassion for their grasping, compassion for their control, compassion for their aggressiveness. These are all states of mind that we can have compassion for. But to go beyond that, to really lift up our mind to try to think in a very broad thing, like Lama Zopa says. To incorporate this idea of our simple generosity, our simple patience, our simple, our simple wishes that nobody be harmed, our simple kindness, this, to elevate that to something more powerful by trying to expand the scope of our understanding and our view. So, I spoke a little bit about this aspect of complacency last week, and then during the week I was thinking, so the other problem is generating the mind of contentedness. And so this is a common thing that sort of, I think is the word conundrum, that we run into in Buddhism, is that there's like this idea of, let's say, complacency and mental focus and trying to generate the right motivation, trying to be rigorous in our development of loving kindness and compassion, patience, that sort of having a determination, and then at the same time to understand that the mind of contentedness is really valuable. So I think the solution to those which are apparently contradictory, complacency versus contentedness, overcoming complacency versus contentedness, is that we should be contented with our situation, my own situation, but never contented with my mind, with my practice. To always think of the expanding the practice as far as we can generate, that practice. So, not to be contented with my negativities, to think that, okay, I've stolen from that shop, I deceived this person, I cheated here, and I stole there, and I abused this person. Not to be contented with that, not to be content with that aspect of your life, and so I think we can reconcile this sort of apparent contradiction between complacency and contentedness by saying, I will not be content with these negativities in my life, but the people around me, their generosity to me, their kindness to me, the situation that I'm in, to really generate a sense of contentedness with that. Not somehow wishing for more and more and more, but in terms of my practice in generosity or patience or kindness, to not be complacent. So that's the sort of what I've been thinking about, trying to think out for myself, how to work on that circumstance for myself. So really an important ingredient of that is having some sort of mindfulness about what's actually happening in your mind at any moment, and to develop that self-awareness of actually knowing what's happening in your mind and having that sense of honesty or that sense of clarity about the actual experiences that you have in your mind. Because in general, these are invisible to us because we aren't aware of the actual process of our own thinking. The sort of micro emotions of our thinking. And so we get caught out all the time by somehow discovering that we have become very angry, or we become very jealous, or we find ourselves being very arrogant and very, sort of feeling superior or something like this, because I have not identified from the micro emotion to the bigger emotion to the really big emotion. And it's only when it gets out of control that we're able to say, gee, I'm really angry. But the real trick about mindfulness is to be able to detect that first moment of the micro emotion that we have. Yeah, ask now. Yeah, sure. So the question is, what's the difference between contentedness and happiness? So happiness is, as a definition, I don't know about definition, but happiness is having a happy mind. Contentedness, I would think, is particularly in relation to our circumstances, and our, let's say, environment, our wife, family, work, relationships. I think from a Buddhist point of view, like Geshe Dogra has said, happiness is a happy mind. So that's internal. Contentedness is also internal, but I think it's primarily, I would say, it's in relation to the circumstances. Whereas happiness, we would normally say that happiness is in relation to circumstances, but in this in the Buddhist context, we would say happiness is a happy mind, to some degree independent of circumstance, external circumstance. So, and that's something to consider, that a happy mind is merely a mind that is happy, not because of something, or not relating to something external, but happy, right? Contentedness, I would say, as a general experience, is in relation to our interactions and circumstance. Just. Yeah. Well, it's about, so just in this discussion, it's about conditionality in relation to a condition. A great car, the beautiful wife, the party, the whatever, the money, the whatever, So the mind of contentedness is, no matter what my circumstances, I am contented with them. And I think it implies a relationship to the external by that content. Anyway, they're only words. So yeah.
Sort of aiming higher or broader or further into the future. future with your actions, and I was wondering how that balances with the idea of contentment and the notion of complacency. It sort of feels like, because there is often a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to do things well, perform correctly, all this sort of thing. So I'm wondering whether that really kind of works against the aim or
Yeah. So the question here is about this idea of Rocky Balboa, sort of aim high. What's the that's and you use the word attachment to that. Okay, so that's a key aspect to avoid. Is because what you then if you so let's just talk about it. So the question is the aspiration. So like in Buddhism, in the refuge period, I go for refuge until I am enlightened. There's an aspiration there. To the Buddha Dharma highs from the virtuous merit, the virtuous activities that I do. Lead and with the aim being to benefit all living beings and to lead them to enlightenment or to liberation or to freedom from any suffering. So it is possible for somebody to generate that thought out of an arrogant pride. That somebody may, like a perversion of arrogance, would declare that they have that motivation. They would proclaim it, but it would be a deception of themselves and a deception towards other people if they're declaring it, So, again, this is this element of complacency, that we have to really understand our motivation and really strive for it to be pure. That we, whether Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or whatever, and they say, I'm going to give away $100 billion, we don't know the exact motivation of that action. It could be a grandiose grasp at fame and glory. Could be. I'm not saying it is. It could be. It could be a pure act of generosity wanting to benefit others. It could be a pure motivation of trying to eliminate malaria from the world for the benefit of all of the future suffering people who suffer from malaria. But similarly, it could be the wish to go down in history as the conqueror of malaria. And so it's just an element of pride and an element of seeking fame and glory. And the only person that knows that is that person, And so the same for us. Me sitting here and teaching, who knows? None of you know what my motivation is. None of you know what my motivation is. So this is the challenge for all of us, and this is where I talk about complacency, So, and it also shows the inability of us to ever judge somebody else's motivation. Right, that's another important aspect. And, and so, then you see that the world is a very, very confusing place because we have no idea why anybody's doing anything. We can have some sort of presumption of motivation. And so trying to work out what other people's motivations are, it's just a fruitless exercise. So the only thing that really can happen is for you to refine and check your own motivations, whether it's cooking dinner for your family, or going to work, or being generous, being kind. We can pervert nearly every action with a faulty motivation. Becoming a self-seeking, ego-satisfying motivation, or we can understand our own thinking and strive to cultivate a good motivation. And that it's an incredible trap. The self-seeking mind, what Buddhists talk about, the self-grasping and the egocentric mind, the self-seeking mind, is so capable of perverting our actions out of this self-centered mind. Incredibly capable of undermining our behaviour into a self-centered action. Whether we're giving away $100 billion or $10, whether we're saying to somebody, "Have a nice day," our self-centeredness can pervert every action. And so Dharma practice is about really understanding that process of the mind, how it can do that, and how to overcome that. And the only person that can do that is you, in your mind. The only person that can really see that and do anything about it is you. And that's why Dharma practice is really such a challenge, because it's entirely self-responsibility. And that makes it on the one hand very difficult, but on the other hand it is the only possible way for us to do anything, to make change. So like last week I mentioned this idea of talking about, when we do a meditation, if we visualize the Buddha and we imagine, rays of light coming from the Buddha. So the traditional meditation is like, from the crown of the Buddha's head, white light comes to my crown. From the Buddha's throat, red light comes to my throat. And from the Buddha's heart, blue light comes to my heart. So body, speech and mind, white, red and blue, the colours coming. And you imagine that you're receiving the blessings of the Buddha's body, the blessings of the Buddha's speech, the blessing of the Buddha's mind, like that. So that's sort of trying to create an idea of being blessed, and that somehow benefits your body, speech and mind. But Geshe Doga had said some years ago in a course, in answer to a question, that what blessing an alternative meaning for blessing is change in my mind. So, when my mind changes, if I've been very miserly and I then practice being generous, the change in my mind from miserliness to generosity, that change is the blessing. The idea of change. And I think it's quite a profound meaning of blessing. So, maybe in terms of our motivation is that we are, and again, not that everybody will like this, but I'd say, the Dharma is not a safe place. The Dharma is not a safe place because, and there's one of the analogies is that the Dharma is like a mirror. That if I've got a mark on my cheek or something in my eye, I look in the mirror and I find the fault and I remove it. So it's said that the Dharma is like a mirror, because when we see the Dharma, we see our faults and we can remove them. So change is blessing. The blessing of my mind is when I change. And to see that and to wish for that.
So, for instance, when you give some money to something, how do you channel that moment? How do you do that so that you make sure that it's coming from what?
Yeah, so the question is about, and I don't know if you live locally here, you're at the Woolworths supermarket in Church Street and the Coles supermarket here, from time to time, I don't know if they're on a roster, but there's a couple of people that you see at different times. They appear at the door. So, when we give, what are the possibilities in your mind when you give? Sorry?
I hope you want to spend it on cigarettes. Perhaps this goes with some food. Actually, I shouldn't have any judgment at all. You need to do something that makes me happy.
But what about in relation to yourself?
To myself.
Are you good? Are you good?
I don't know about all good, but maybe this is something kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe this is a kind thing to do. But then once I bought a person some hot soup, it was too hot.
Yeah. So, look, when we, so in the texts, it really encourages that when we give, that we must give without arrogance, particularly without arrogance of poor person, me superior, so to try to really overcome that sense of superiority or looking down on the person. So really to eliminate that attitude, and I would, just to challenge one thing you said, that mere thought, I hope he doesn't go and spend it on cigarettes. That sort of controlling approach is problematic. It's problematic because. Yeah. Yeah, and that's another aspect too, is to engage in mere giving. So the thought of whether you're in the right mood or not is not in that equation. To overcome that, like you think, if you try to examine when you say, I'm not in the right mood. Well, what does that mean? What does it actually mean in terms of your thinking? Anyway, so there's no end of analysis possible, but we're encouraged to give unconditionally. So don't go spending it on cigarettes or dope or, unconditionally, although it's a consideration if it's harmful, but if you choose to give, you try to give unconditionally without superiority, free of conditionality, free of superiority, and a genuine engagement with the person as a person. So, and it's difficult. I know myself. I wouldn't call it offhand, but it is a little bit distant. To overcome that distance is important. Let's do a little bit of meditation. So, to try to cultivate mindfulness is it's only mindfulness that enables us to detect or to become aware of all of these games that we play in our mind. So we have to generate mind, and mindfulness will come through the practice of our concentration. So even doing a breathing meditation, by engaging our focus through effort, as beginners we have to apply effort to try to hold the object of meditation. And through that effort and holding our concentration on the object over a period of time, we'll find that our self-awareness, our mindfulness improves. So just bring your mind, your awareness within yourself. Let all of the various thoughts just drop away. And then when your mind is clear of any thought, then turn your attention to the breath. In particular, the awareness of the breath coming in and going out. And hold your focus on that absolutely 100%. And we'll do this for a few minutes. Relax your concentration a little bit. Now we'll just repeat that meditation. So, sort of reflect on your meditation. And, sometimes we have an obstacle where there's a lot of chatter, mental chatter going on, and that chatter we may even be talking about the meditation, or using words to describe the meditation. So ideally, the meditation should be no words involved, no verbalization. So we have the object of the breath, or the awareness of the breath is our object, and then there is my mind meditating on that object. So if we can remove all of the chatter and the distractions, we can come to a point where my mind and the object become like one thing. That my mind focusing on the breath and the object of the breath in my mind, that is like a single thing. So the mind is fully absorbed into the object that we're meditating on. So try to remove all of the various distractions, the mental chatter, all of the sort of, the mind flying off. Try to avoid all of that and seek to fully dissolve your mind into the object, so that there's no separation between the experience of the object and the mind experiencing that. Let's just meditate again for a few minutes. And bring your concentration back to the room. So we've still got time for a little bit more discussion. If anybody's got any questions or observations or anything they'd like to share, you're most welcome. In relation, what was the word? Did you use?
Well, at the beginning you were thinking, you were telling us that you kind of had to. I mean, you try to be aware of being like try to detach to that part, that evil part of the mind, or that. So is that the ego?
So the question is about, let's say, recognizing the destructive emotional part, anger, jealousy, miserliness, arrogance, all these sort of things. So certainly from a Buddhist point of view, all of them stem out of an egocentric attitude. And there's an aspect of grasping at reality in a way that is invalid. So a term that's used is called inappropriate attention. So it's sort of like grasping at reality in a way that is not actually the way that it exists, but we grasp at it in a way. And then on the basis of that, we then generate an ego, because it's based on this fundamentally flawed perception of reality. And so we have a concept of I and an ego, and let's say a particular conceptualization of the I, and then from that we generate a very egocentric behavioral approach. So this, for us, that experience is innate. It's an innate experience. And so the fundamental sort of like philosophy of the Buddhist path is for us trying to understand that whole process and then to work on eliminating the error in that, and it's I think probably a profoundly difficult process, So all of the things like anger, jealousy, ignorance, pride, miserliness, competitiveness, wrong in like a natively wrong view about reality. All of these things they stem from this combination of an incorrect view of reality and then this self-centeredness as well. So we probably can't easily see that, without a lot of meditation and a lot of understanding, to generate that. So I don't know if that answers your question or if it helps you. So.
Earlier on you were talking about dependent co-arising.
Yeah, dependent arising, yeah.
And then you jumped to loving kindness and Buddhism, and it wasn't even that connection.
Yeah, so what the question is about, so what I'd said is, it's a quote from the Dalai Lama that, Buddhism, the philosophical view of Buddhism is dependent arising. So that's the philosophical content. If somebody says to you, what is reality, then you refer to the dependent arising thing. And then the practice of Buddhism is loving kindness. So they aren't in contradiction. There's dependent arising and the practice. But we can practice loving kindness without particularly being very philosophical about it. So. And somebody might be very philosophical but not practice much loving kindness. And so both are required. But that's not quite your question, is it? So what was your question then?
I guess my question was, can we see loving kindness as the product of the, let's say, dependent relationship between Dharma and then the philosophical basis, for example?
Yeah, so is loving kindness a consequence of understanding dependent arising? And is dependent arising a consequence of being kind, and part of dependent arising is sort of identifying or understanding that nothing has its own solitary, unique existence, independent existence. That nothing has that solitary, unique, independent existence. And so there's a temptation then for people to think, nothing exists because of that. Nothing exists truly. And so one of the consequences of that thinking is that you then think, there's no need, there's no relevance to loving kindness. It's a mistaken view that comes from that some people go down that rabbit hole where they think that the practice of morality is irrelevant, or that the practice of loving kindness is irrelevant, and that's a mistaken view. But so one of the answers to that is that even despite this dependent arising or interdependent, interdependency of everything, that even with that somehow love and compassion is more in keeping with our nature than not. So it's sort of like that. It's there's a naturalness, a natural truth about love and compassion for us or for any living being. That probably doesn't answer your question either. So, look, it's a very good question. Does the full understanding of dependent arising, does that lead you automatically to love and compassion as your expression, as the expression of that? I suspect the answer is not automatically, that both have to be cultivated, but to fully have dependent arising as a beneficial view, philosophical view in your life, it needs love and compassion to temper it. It'd be my initial answer to that question. Yeah, it requires loving kindness to temper your philosophical view. To give it the right flavour.
Is the loving kindness what towards yourself, a way of dealing with all the independent?
So the question is about loving kindness towards ourselves. You may not like this answer. My personal feeling is that all that I want, everything that I want, is for myself. I am, the mere thought I is I want happiness. I don't want suffering. That the thought, the mere I, merely saying I, is conditioned on I want happiness and I don't want suffering. And to me, wanting happiness is an expression of love for myself. Not wanting suffering is an expression of compassion for myself. So I think that natively, we do not lack love and compassion for ourselves. But what goes wrong is that our thinking about the methods to have happiness and to be free of suffering, the methods that we choose instead create suffering and distance ourselves from happiness. So as Shantideva, one of the great Indian masters, who's somewhere up there in the altar, as he says, we don't want suffering, but we run to the causes of suffering. We run to them as though they're a precious treasure, like something really precious. And we want happiness, but we sort of treat the causes of happiness as though they're poison. And so the thing is to understand how that, for instance, our fondness for anger, let's say our fondness for anger, generating anger towards others, and we openly will say, anger's really beneficial. That's what we will say to ourselves. But from the actual experience and the consequences, for me, anger is a poison. So the real practice of Buddhism is to try to understand, let's say in relation to anger, to really see it as a poison for your own happiness, as a destroyer of your happiness, and as a destroyer of the happiness of others, and to absolutely get rid of it for that reason. Right, so you can say, I would say I natively have love and compassion for myself, but the mere fact that I get angry shows I am my own worst enemy. I create my own suffering through my misunderstanding of anger, jealousy, miserliness, love, compassion, kindness. My misunderstanding of those things actually creates suffering for me, creates unhappiness, distances me from peace and happiness, causes conflict with everybody. And then I turn around and I say, I need to have more love and compassion for myself. Well, real love and compassion for yourself is understanding what causes problems and fixing that, reversing that behaviour. So, and then, I think it's just the way I approach it. I think I don't lack having love and compassion for myself because I'm totally self-centred. I am completely in love with myself and compassionate for myself because I am totally self-centred. So, but if you really want to have compassion and love for yourself, overcome the negative afflictions, that is the... And so when we suffer emotionally, it's because we've let the afflictive emotions harm us. And so we feel really low and depressed, or we feel very, sort of confused internally. It's because I have let all of these emotional afflictions harm me. And so I feel very low and suffering. Okay. So let's just rejoice that we all came together and we've thought about these things. The questions show people are really thinking about these issues. And, from my side, so much benefit for me to be able to sit here and think about these things and try to communicate. So this is it's a two-way experience. Your contribution, my contribution, everybody's contribution produces a unique experience. So imagine that takes the form of white light from everybody, the benefit from everybody, and bring it above your own head and completely dissolve that light down into yourself, filling your body with light. And then imagine giving it away to rays of light go out, giving away this benefit to everybody else here in the room, and to your family, to those close to you, and to imagine to all living beings. That this is something, it is a unique, it is benefit, it is something very positive, and imagine the rays of light go out to every living being, bringing them benefit. Then imagine those rays of light dissolve back into you, completely absorb back into you. So thank you very much. I'll be back next week, and I will try to prepare